Welcome to Courageous Conversations with Heman Das, where we dive into the big ideas and bold actions driving social change. I'm your host, Heman Das, Research and Communications Coordinator at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. I'm also in the middle of my postgrad in the social innovation and entrepreneurship at the London School of Economics. So, I'm all about turning ideas into impact. And today's conversation is one I have been really looking forward with my very guest is Dr. Vikrant Kishore, who is a filmmaker, academic journalist, and honestly someone who just refuses to look away from the uncomfortable stuff like caste, gender, and Dr. Kishore has done some incredible work on Indian cinema, celebrity culture, and intangible heritage. He sat on the juries at the film festival across Australia, India, and he runs the Cinematic International Film Festival of India, advises the Victorian Multicultural Commission, sits on the Australia India Film Council Board, and the list goes on. But here is why what we are really talking about today. Dr. Kishore has spent years documenting something that a lot of people would rather pretend does not exist, which is caste discrimination in South Asian diaspora, specifically in the Australia. And his upcoming documentary, Resisting Casteism in Australia, takes us from the Melbourne to Sydney to Newcastle and the Coles Holborough. Real voices, real stories of exclusion, and real resistance. I actually had the privilege of watching the draft before this conversation, and I will be honest, it stayed with me, and we're going to get into all of it today. Dr. Kishore, welcome to Courageous Conversation. It's pleasure having you. So, Dr. Kishore, I just want to start somewhere very personal to you because your documentary opens something deeply personal too. You shared this memory from the boarding school. I mean, it was year seven English class, Dickens on the syllabus, but the one note discussing Dickens, right? Shoemakers was a quote for the chamar, and you have this line in the film that really hits me. You said, "It taught me how discrimination can whisper and screams." Would you please take us back to that moment? What did you actually realize? What was happening? And looking back, how did that shape who you become today?
All right. Thank you, Heman, for inviting me. I'm not going to discuss the issues that I discuss in film because I'm going to open the film and then through the screenings I want to discuss. So I don't want to open up lots of interesting and some very personal moments for discussion out here at the moment. But yes, as some of the aspects, what I do as a researcher, as a filmmaker, and as an academic. I study various things, as you just introduced me, as a filmmaker and as someone who researches Indian cinema and caste issues, which has been a very recent discussion which have come back probably after 20 years. And when I went to Australia, about now almost 20, more than 20 years now in Australia, and I thought caste is an issue probably I won't be seeing in diasporic communities. But I was wrong. And over the years, I encountered the issue of caste again and again. And it is always within a privileged kind of lens. For people who don't understand what caste is, basically caste is the division within the Hindu religion from the higher to the so-called people who are outside of the caste system. And caste system also operates in a way which is a graded inequality. What Dr. B.R. Ambedkar talked about, caste is a system of graded inequality. So the highest will find every other grades, they will discriminate against each and every one. The second highest will probably look upon the higher ones to them, but will discriminate against the ones who are lower to them. So this is discrimination, this kind of embedded discrimination that is within the caste system of Hindu religion. It is problematic, where everyone is impacted. So even within the highest of the high, they will have subdivision of the caste. So it's not just one caste. In India, each caste has multiple subdivisions. But what I talk about are those people who are outside of that caste system and who are supposedly who never had the privilege or who never had any rights. They were treated as someone worse than animals. So when I went to Australia, I was surprised at how the Aboriginals in Australia were treated, or rather mistreated. They did not have rights. Till 1970s, the Aboriginals in Australia were treated or were counted in the flora and fauna of Australia and not as people. And then suddenly, I started looking at those kind of stories, how, within the caste system, how people were treated as untouchables, the outcast, who were not given the rights, who were taken away all kinds of, ways to express themselves, who were, in a way, they were discriminated in such a way that they were not treated like humans. They were treated with full of contempt, and in a way that was without any humanity, and that was the problem. And this, coming through a privileged background, my experiences is more as someone from a privileged background who has access to everything, who has seen power. But even with that kind of power, when you go to very high privileged schools and all, yet that aspect of caste still gets stuck with you. Even when I did not know what my caste was, it was others who were able to tell me what my caste was, because they wanted to set me right. They wanted to put you in your position so that they would feel either superior or feel more empowered or whatever. So even in elite institutions, and that's what I reflect in my film about being in elite institutions, it did not take away, that, or coming from a very, privileged position, coming from a family which was powerful enough to be able to send me to the best boarding schools, to the best private colleges or universities and everywhere. Yet they could not save me from the kind of discrimination that caste would, bring along. And lots of times this discrimination was also a kind of a backlash as to, why are you so privileged? Why are you getting the same thing that we can afford, and why are you being able to afford those things? And these are the kind of discussions that shaped me, when, and you used one particular line from my film, that how discrimination can operate. It doesn't need to scream. Even it can work in whispers. The coded ways, the way caste operates, it is there. And it is not just related to Hindus only. Another thing, lots of people think that caste is a problem within the Hindu communities or Hindu religion. No. People who moved from Hindu religion and who took on other religious identities, be it Muslims, be it Buddhists, be it Christians, in India you will find, or in South Asia, you will find Dalit Christians. Now, people who converted into Christians, they are still being called Dalits, all right? So they could not get rid of that caste identity even if they, took on Christianity. Or Muslims divided in Azrael, Alzaf, Pasmandas, and all these kind of divisions within Muslims, and the Pasmanda communities who are also the oppressed communities. And these are the kind of very important discussions. But coming back to the thing which we started from, the diaspora, people who go out and settle. And when they settle abroad, what becomes important is that, do they take their nationality or do they take their culture? And do they take also the cultural baggage of the religion, of the caste? Well, that is quite, problematic, because the problematic divisions of caste, I can see. It has happened in USA. There have been lots of discussions there. In UK, there were lots of discussions because the diasporic communities have a history of more than 100 years. In Australia, the South Asian diaspora became prominent only in the late 1990s or early 2000s. So it wasn't easy to understand how caste operates there. So, but in 20 years, I could feel it, I could sense it, I could understand it. And for me, became important to understand the story of the community as to what they have to say and what they want to, talk about it. So there were lots of strands, but I would, go back to you to ask more questions, because I could keep going on, in different directions while I'm talking about this.
Dr. Vikrant, that's a very interesting fact that when you come from a certain caste, I mean, no matter you convert it into the Buddhism or the Christianity, caste still stays with you. That's really interesting. And you also spoke something about in documentary that a lot of people need to hear. You say that when I moved to Australia, I thought I was free from it. But you were wrong at that point. Caste had crossed the ocean long before me. That's what you, I mean, said in your documentary. And look, I think there is this belief, especially among the people from dominant castes, that once you migrate, caste just disappears. But it's just an Indian problem, right? You leave it behind. But you went to Melbourne, Sydney, Newcastle, and you found it everywhere, as just you recently mentioned. So tell me, what does caste actually look like when it lives specifically in the Australia? How does it show up in a country that pride itself on a multiculturalism?
Yeah, there's a very important question and an important discussion to have as to why we South Asians, or me as an Indian, I never thought about how caste operates in diasporic communities, because the stories that comes back to India or South Asia, it's generally always about race. It's about racism and vilification in terms of race, or being attacked in the name of race. So the stories are always about how diasporic communities have to face racism, and they always challenge. So our concern was always about that, yeah, because we would be always a minority, we are the ones who are migrating, so we look at that kind of larger structure. And racism in the Western countries is a problem. It till date is a problem, and it continues in different ways. And for people migrating, so it works in different ways. So Indians generally, when they migrate, they are looking at, or South Asians, they look at the issues that they face. And racism is a big problem which people face. Some very little, some in a big way, But then that becomes a talking point, because majority people who are or who have been privileged to be able to go abroad or to Australia or to US, via the skilled migration programs, which always looks at your education, which looks at your English proficiency. Okay, remember, these are the ways as to what is your education background. You are going for a higher education, then you have to show a certain level of English proficiency through IELTS or TOEFL or whatever. And also the kind of amount that your bank has. So you also have to show your bank balance. So basically, these are the kind of checks and balances which is very skewed towards the privileged caste and class. All right. So people who want to go abroad, the scholarships are very minor. Maybe people who end up getting scholarship, they are less than 0.5% getting Indian government scholarship and being able to go abroad and pursue the studies. Or people from the minority communities, or people from the underprivileged communities, which also including communities from the kind of backward or scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, as in India it is notified. They're very small number. They hardly get a chance to be there. So this kind of movement, your bank balance, your English education, and your particular skill that you get through those kind of private or elite educations, that so it puts those privileged communities much at the center, who could get who could migrate easily and who could stay. So that kept for a long time people from the underprivileged background away from these shores. So when privileged communities went, they were dealing with their own people, their own community, their own class, their own caste, majority. Okay, so whatever you call it, upper caste, or the privileged caste, or for us oppressor castes, so they were just mixing with each other. And then for them the biggest problem was race, because that kind of they never identified people who were coming from the communities which were underprivileged or were from the oppressed communities. But things changed post 2000s. Even people from underprivileged communities, who through affirmative action, whole lot of people who became, who had the power, who could have that kind of money, who could have that kind of privilege to go out and do study, and scholarships also came in handy here. So they moved out quite a lot. And this is where, even when I say quite a lot, in terms of percentage, you will see only maybe it is less than 2% of underprivileged people or people from, the oppressed communities. And yet the stories, the moment you open any Indian community or South Asian community news magazine, you go to the matrimonial ads, and you'll see the matrimonial ads is the first one where people are starting to ask, caste, this caste, they are looking for, a specific caste, their own community. Maybe some people can easily say, hey, we want to continue our culture, and being within our caste protects our culture. That could be one of the ways to talk about. But actually, it is not that easy. And this has been proven time and time again, because caste privileges and looking at making friendship or connecting with people. Other things like when South Asians, when they have their own homes or their own, or they rent out rooms to share with others, things like vegetarianism, people preferring people who only eat vegetarian, that they should only come and stay with them. Okay, so vegetarianism is another way to propagate caste or discriminate against people's food habits. All right, so that's there. So I've just told you about marriage, particular vegetarianism. Then also friendship, looking at friendship on the basis of what is your surname. I've encountered multiple times in Australia, in most of the places that I visit, even when I was in France, where one of my French friend very proudly introduced me to one of their Indian friend who had married a French woman. And the man was very happy to ask me about, oh, what caste you are. I'm from this privileged caste thing, and I came here, and I wouldn't have worked, but I had to work I did all the labor class work, which at my home I used to have 20 servants, but now see, I'm a self-made man, and I've got 5 houses, and I've got this French wife, and I'm doing, but I still carry my the upper caste, privilege, because again, that was under the notion that I'm visiting France, I'm working with a very big organization. So taking as on face value that you judge, oh, because you have access to all the privileges, so you must be from a privileged caste, and you must be someone just like me. And that is another thing, is that because of your dressing sense, because the way you speak, because the kind of educational background that you demonstrate, automatically people consider that, oh, you must be from our community, because we have the right to study, we have the right to be English educated. Underprivileged people, they have a certain look. So there's another, the third thing. What is your look? What can you wear? How can you talk? You can't be an intellectual if you're from underprivileged background. How can you show those kind of intellect? How can you hold your ground in terms of, putting yourself out there in such a, thought out manner? And these are the things which lots of people, it's not one thing. Every year, every, second month, I find a person who would question me, who would ask me, who are you? What is your last name? So that thing, this is the third or fourth thing which I wanted to tell you about. The last name, the marker, the identity marker. Who are you? I'm Vikrant. No. Who's Vikrant? Vikrant Kishore. Kishore what? People want to know who and what your last name signifies. So matrimonial, okay, vegetarianism, the last name, the kind of, what you wear, how you dress, how you speak. These are the so-called privileges that people carry themselves, or they identify others. They want to see that others should, or they base their friendship on these markers. And if you are not within those markers, then they have a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what frustrates me about this. It's not about that people do not know about it, but it's the way they choose not to see it. I mean, it's like a denial. I mean, casteism exists in Pakistan too, but it's just a fact that it's in a denial. People do not accept that caste exists there. And in your documentary, Professor Hari Bapuji makes this powerful point in your film that caste is this comprehensive system of inequality. It got the race in it, gender in it, class, all of it wrapped together and shared in diaspora space. When you try to talk about it, there's a silence, there is a denial. So why do you think that is, and why are privileged caste communities so invested in this denial? Is it shameful, or is it something that they care about protecting their image? And honestly, what did people tell you off camera that they would not say it on it?
All right. Professor, as you took the name of Professor Hari Bapuji, and he's one person who I've featured in my film, and an academic who I respect quite a lot. And his words are very loaded. And he doesn't talk just for the sake of talking, but he's done years of research and focus on how caste operates, especially within the business, which is very important. But I also bring this particular aspect as to what pushed me towards the film was not just about the theory or in terms of curiosity in academic sense. It was also about years of listening to people and understanding what are the kind of issues that they are having. It was not about talking through or wanting to present a kind of a privileged community or privileged caste's perspective, but often listening to this repeated claim that caste has no relevance in Australia, caste doesn't exist, it is only happening in India, while people's social media posts were casteist. What they were sharing online were casteist. What they were talking in parties were casteist. What the kind of vegetarianism and the food, those kind of discrimination that was happening, it was casteist in its own structure. And it's very important. So the contradiction between these lived experience and the kind of dominant narrative of denial, it was impossible for me to ignore. And that's why the denial aspect of denial becomes central to the film, and which privileged communities often insist that they do not discriminate, and that insistence again and again, it is presented as a proof of innocence. But what is rarely acknowledged is how power works. Right now, there is this huge hue and cry in India at the moment about the UGC bringing new, kind of regulations about protecting the rights of the Bahujan, Dalits, and Adivasis. And people are against it. Oh, this will be misused because they can put a case on us that we are, discriminating against them. So even without, so it's like, I'm reading some interesting take on that why are people jumping to conclusion is that if some safeguards are being given for the underprivileged or the communities which have been targeted for so long or discriminated, and many have committed suicide in universities, and universities, lots of posts are vacant in India, which should be filled by SCs, STs, or underprivileged or Bahujans and all, that isn't. And when a kind of protection comes for that, everybody wants it to be removed because they think it is an attack on themselves. And that is how the privilege works. So, each time conversation about caste or the underprivileged begins, they are frequently redirected. The focus shifts to intent rather than impact, and or to the individual goodwill rather than structural patterns. So, and these conversations is reframed as an attack on culture or dismissed as divisive. Okay, that, oh, it's divisive. Like I've been, lots of times, why are you talking about caste? Caste doesn't exist in Australia. When I had my symposium just in November in Melbourne, and then I was interviewed by SBS, one of the prominent channels. And after my interview, there was actually some religious groups came out with a press release saying that they should be consulted because there are some people who are talking about caste discrimination which does not exist in Australia. Hey, have you done your research? They were asking others to do research, but they haven't done their research. They are saying, oh, we do not believe in discrimination. Hey, sorry, go out, do a bit more research, do a study. Every time, looking through the glasses of privileged position, isn't going to get rid of the problems that they are. It is always better to acknowledge what the problem is and then find people who are going through those kind of issues and talk to them. And once you talk to them, maybe you will be able to help more. Nobody is accusing you. But if there is a problem, somebody is wanting to bring that attention to you, you should pay attention. If you're calling yourself a community leader or a community organization, which the government should consult or which the media should consult, hey, do some work out there and question, do some introspection. Talk to yourself, look at your community, how it operates, and maybe then you will get a better idea rather than being defensive. The problem is that people start becoming defensive because they think it is an attack on religion or religious communities. No. Discrimination, inequality, prejudices, these are human, rights issues. These are issues of dignity. These are issues of humanity, which needs to be addressed. This has nothing to do with religion. Religion can, perpetuate it. And if it is perpetuating, it needs to be questioned. And if you are practicing because of your cultural baggage, then you need to question your own cultural baggage. Come down to the basics of humanity. Come back to the aspect of dignity. That aspect of dignity becomes very important for you the moment any racist attacks you or any racism, happens to you, direct or indirect. Okay. Or if you don't get a job where a white is given privilege and you are not, or maybe it's not even the case, but you can use that particular issue that, hey, we are the second-rate people when it comes to color. Our brown skin or our black skin, causes, certain form of discrimination or certain kind of prejudice or even bias. The moment you are talking about those things and you understand those kind of discriminations, both directly and indirectly, then why don't you look in yourself? What are your own biases? What are your own prejudices? And if you think that you can come out clean, then that's fine. All right, maybe you're not doing it. Look at others as well. These are the questions people fail to ask themselves. And they are jumping to conclusion that they are vilifying us. They are saying discrimination happens. There's nothing. What do you mean by discrimination the way it happens in India? Do you want someone to be paraded naked? Do you want someone to be beaten black and blue? Do you want to see violence only as a form of discrimination, which is regularly seen in South Asian countries? No, it isn't going to happen in Australia. Violence will find, ways to be addressed. So, of course, people find indirect ways, okay? The indirect discrimination that keeps on happening. So people want proof that show me the violence. Now, there are different kinds of violence, okay? There is also, microaggressions, the different kind of aggressions that is happening. The microaggressions, basically who you want to become friends with. What is your last name? oh, I don't want to share my room with someone who eats meat. It is not just as simple as, the food choice, but it's also about lots of things. And then you are going to share offices with people who are eating meat day in, day out. They are having everything. You are fine with that. But then the moment it comes to your home, you're finding it problematic. So there are lots of things, there are issues. In one of my findings in the film was that caste discrimination is not dramatic, and people are looking for drama. No, in Australia, in Western world, that drama is not going to unfold. Nobody is going to beat someone, because the moment you do that, that will be taken into particular action. It does not usually announce itself. It operates through everyday interaction. Those who feel safe to speak and who hold back. So, those, there is a kind of a subtlety in which caste is being practices. When discrimination is not direct, confrontational, or violent, it is easy to deny. Okay? Whereas what is happening here is that the indirect ways of discrimination that takes place. And I find it problematic. One student who came and told me, in fact, during my symposium, that one of his friends came to his house and he had Dr. Ambedkar's portrait in his house. Okay, the guy looked at, I said, "Oh, Ambedkar, what is he doing?" I said, "No, Ambedkar is my hero." And then few minutes back, the friend disappeared. He never came back. He never contacted. All his phones were, not taken, because he found it offensive and he could relate with Ambedkar, who was going to put a portrait of Ambedkar for them. Ambedkar is an international statesperson. He is a national hero of India. Yet, Ambedkar's connection with the oppressed communities is so strong that instantly people put these two things together, and they instantly say, "Oh, I want to be with someone Ambedkarite or not." Okay. One of the journalists in my symposium, Neeraj Nanda, he talked he in fact shared his view that whenever he goes to any events where there is either talks about Ambedkar or issues of caste, then he gets people who call him up and says, "Why are you capturing stories of these Bhimis or Bhimta, all these are the slangs to be called of people who follow Dr. B.R. Ambedkar or who talks about caste oppression." Now, I've given you so many examples. Now, these are things which is happening in Australia, okay? And these are the stories which are repeatedly, which is coming. Students who are coming out, who are facing those issues, or people not being given that space, So most of the multicultural talks that happens, these multicultural leaders, they go out and talk to the white people and they say, "Hey, we are being discriminated racially. Our brown skin is making us, target of people. We need representation." So you take representation in parliament, you want representation in politics, you want representation in economics, all due to the brown skin. Very good. But you don't want anyone to see your own prejudices. Why is that so? And that prejudice is existing. It has been proven. In USA, when Seattle, endorsed caste discrimination, it became a huge cry. It became a fight, amongst the privileged and the underprivileged. Yet people, the caste discrimination was included. Whereas in California, the moneyed people actually forced so much, the governor, Newsom, it got passed in California in both the Senates. Caste discrimination was endorsed and passed in both the Senates of California state. It went to the governor, and governor vetoed it, not because he understood caste very well, but because he was under the kind of pressure of these kind of groups, which were much more powerful than the ones without the voice. Yet it proved that Senate and all took into action that yes, caste discrimination exists. So did in Australia. Australia became the first country which includes caste within its anti-racism framework. Okay, so in 2021, or in 2020, when Australian Human Rights Commission, it asked for public submission for broadening its anti-racism framework, lots of us put in our submission that within the anti-racism framework, we want caste to be included. And in 2024, in its scoping report and its final report, it included caste within it. Why? Because we made a strong, submission, and we gave the proof how caste operates in Australia. And those are the things which we have established. So nobody can say caste doesn't exist in Australia. You go to media, you read reports, there are testimonials, there are people who have gone through it, And of course, there are policies now being made at council level and at state level, and it will continue to happen at a much bigger level. We want it to come to universities. We want these policies to be taken at particular corporate level as well.
Dr. Vikrant, I find really interesting the fact that the surname plays a really big role, in your identity. In Pakistan, we do not, it really does not bother where you come from, what's your surname. But when I came in the London, I have a class fellow postmate, I'm the friends from the India who really wants to know about my surname. That's really interesting thing that I found here. Watching your documentary, that really hits home for me because this works really connects with my journey back home in Pakistan. And I have to share with you something here that it's SARIM. I have been documenting caste discrimination in Pakistan for almost 4 years. Human rights violation, working with community, Dalit community on ground. And the patterns are stingingly similar. There's the same silence, the same denial, the same coded exclusion. And now LSE, my focus is a bit shifted. I'm exploring how we can empower, bonded labor communities or that come from a Dalit community in Pakistan. Because what I believe that this is where caste hits hard. In labor, it's dignity and a basic right for them. And I'm seriously thinking about taking the PhD into it, researching caste across South Asia diaspora, the mechanism of discrimination and the resistance movements emerging globally. So I wanted to ask, as someone who navigated both academia and activism on this issue, what would you suggest? How do you balance rigorous research with the urgency of what's happening on the ground? And what gaps do you think still need to be filled?
Well, thanks for this question because it is quite a loaded question. And, what is happening? One good thing, what is happening is that caste as a research area has grown. Okay. In the last 10 years, or even probably I'll say last 15 years, the focus on caste studies has grown quite a lot. People are studying and people are doing the PhD, they are doing the thesis, they are writing on a regular basis. One of the problems with caste studies was that most of the times, and this is a whole lot of Ambedkarite community people also found, that it is through the privileged lenses. So people who are privileged, who are from privileged castes and privileged communities, privileged castes mainly, they are the ones who are doing most studies on Dalits and Adivasis and Bahujans instead of Bahujans, Dalits and Adivasis taking a lead. That space has already been occupied by the so-called, these scholars, because scholars also keep looking for areas which has gaps and which needs studies, and where certain scholars can be cited, as much as possible. So lots of people are like vultures who want to occupy those spaces and just snatch away the right people to be there to talk about it. Okay, so that's been there, and that has been, in discussion, that why are the voices of the people with lived experiences are lacking in these areas. Okay, so that's there. But then that's one side of the story. Then there are lots of people who who are allies, who come from that privileged communities or privileged castes, but they work as allies who understand. So they have a particular sense of solidarity, a sense of understanding and self of representing and not misrepresenting. So I veer towards this group, and I would always support those groups who come with a certain empathy and who would like to come to a kind of a place where they try to understand the communities and put the voices of the community through their take and not put their own so-called expert opinions and not robbing of the voices of those people. Then there are lots of people who are doing it. That's fine. That is the right approach, okay, which I support. And then there is this new breed of, Bahujan, Dalit and Adivasi scholars who are coming up and who are talking about it, who are, writing articles, who are doing PhDs. And this is the kind of community that I want to be more supportive of and want to see them to tell the stories, because that is the most valid and the kind of best work that comes out. I'm not trying to say the other works are not very good. There are different works and you respect them for what they are doing. So it's very important that those kind of work is being acknowledged and right people are given voice. Another important thing is that you said gaps. There are gaps at every space. Dalit, Adivasi, Bahujan, these areas are so understudied, okay? So understudied that it still needs a whole lot of discussion, just like what you mentioned about Pakistan and how caste operates in Pakistan. Not very many people know. Now, a person like you who's been into that society, who's experienced that, I would be very interested in hearing what have been your, you have been researching, you have been talking about it. So someone like you taking on the PhD would be the right person to do a PhD and throw more light on it and do a comparative study, or not comparative, but use whatever thing is studied or in India and how it operates in Pakistan, because as I mentioned, in Islam, lots of people who left Hinduism or other religion, they were also treated as second-rate Muslims. Okay, in India, pasmanda is a kind of a very known terminology, which is about the people who are marginalized within the Muslim community. Similarly, what is happening in Pakistan, I don't have much idea about it, but I would be very interested in studying and reading about that. So, and the gaps are multiple. Like what Hari Bapuji is studying, very few people are studying about, how caste operates in corporates, how caste operates in marketing, how advertisement and all these things are very focused to the privileged castes only, and it just moves out of it does not even take acknowledge the other castes or who are in the fringes or in the peripheries. So those are very important things. And you know the things, the way in the last 2 3 days and in last 7 days in India, that I was mentioning you, there is this University Grants Commission's new guidelines, which also puts onus on creating some kind of checks and balances for discrimination against the underprivileged people. And there has been a whole lot of backlash from the privileged communities wanting to say that, oh, we are going to be targeted. Hey, if you are not discriminating against anyone, and then why do you have to fear that you will be targeted? Dalits and Adivasis are not going out and saying that, hey, I'm being discriminated until unless they are being beaten, they are being discriminated, they are being, marginalized. Only then someone will say. If you're not being discriminated, why would someone, fake it? Everybody's like, I was appalled. I was appalled by one of the person who used to work with me, a journalist, in her Facebook thing is saying that, hey, now the Dalits who will be, if they go and propose to any high caste girls, and if they say no to them, they will put a fake case on these high caste girls for not accepting the proposal. Now, what kind of obnoxious, stupid, and kind of illiterate ways these so-called journalists are portraying a certain amendments or new regulations, and they are portraying things. They don't, and I'm very saddened that when you see women journalists doing that, then it means we should remove all kinds of checks and balances that we have for dowry and other things which protects women. Okay, because there are lots of false cases in terms of dowry in India. Every year, hundreds of cases are false. So, but then what happens to that 1 million cases which are real? Our focus should be on those real cases. Even if it's not, there are 100 fake cases, and if there are 2 real, our focus should be on those 2 real. There are checks and balances out there. So I find it very problematic where people remove their humanity and put on the lens of their own caste, on their religion, and start discriminating on the basis of that. I have a problem with that. And I feel very saddened that really learned people, really people who have the power, journalists, they are spreading these kind of rumors, they are spreading these kind of uninformed views. Of course, there is a certain pressure group which is in action, and the pressure group work in a way to foment those kind of divisionary tactics, and that has worked. In India, it is working at the moment, because of course people think the government is run by a certain kind of government which is of the privileged castes and the privileged communities, so they would listen to them. It is an unfortunate thing. Governments don't work in that. Government has to take care of everyone. So I thought this was a good way, even if it is not the best guideline. I feel that anywhere where you are taking account of the underprivileged, people who are oppressed, even genders, be it women or be it LGBTIQ, their rights have to be, taken into account. Anyone who's marginalized should be our concern. I can't be talking about humanity or equality if my focus is just on people from the, underprivileged communities or a caste which have been out of that, privileges. My thing is also about solidarity by, standing with LGBTIQ people or people, black people who are facing, any kind of issues in any part of the world, or what is happening with the Muslim minorities in different parts of the world, or even bombing certain countries because you don't like them, and killing children out there. These are human issues. I can't I can't be very focused on my own issues and turn my eyes away from other kind of discrimination. So maybe in certain situations some people are privileged, but in certain other situations those same privileged communities might be underprivileged or might be targeted. So when it comes to racism, I raise my voice. I'm very first person to go and march against any form of racism. Then I'm standing with any colored person because it is my concern. But if the same colored person is becoming casteist or is practicing caste discrimination, I'll raise my voice against that person as well. While I'll stand when that person complains about racism or is victim of racism, I'll stand with them. But then the same person, if they are practicing caste discrimination, I'll challenge them as well. That is, again, I'll say the basic of humanity needs to be very clear. And if that is not clear, you can't say that you can stand for one thing and you would, support something which is not human or not humane or not within the equality framework.
Dr. Vikrant, what really disappoints me is that, caste is only seen as an Indian problem. There is a lot of literature available on casteism or caste discrimination or communities discriminated on work and descent available. And there's a lot of literature available on Indian casteism and even the diaspora. And what really hurts me is that there's not much literature available on casteism in Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And I really wanted to explore that lens of caste and Dalit lens in that. And on that note, your work is really making waves. Your caste research was recognized as one of the top 20 impactful projects at the University of Nottingham. Australia's national anti-racism framework now officially acknowledges caste, thanks in part of the submission from the activists like Harun and the Humanism Project. You're also advising the Victorian Multicultural Commission, which is, interesting that doors are opening for you. But Aparna Ramkante, see something in your film that keep I keep thinking about it that this change cannot happen in 10 years or 20 years. These are generations of discrimination. So here is my last question. In this system of actually listening or just a tokenism dressed up as a progress, what's it really going to take, to make the change?
Well, again, the thing is that, who would have thought that in Australia, I never thought in Australia we would be able to bring the attention towards caste discrimination in media and then at policy level. But then over the years, activists have come out, academics have come out, and people have started working together to make tangible changes. It's not about just making noise, it's about tangible changes. So in Australia, when we started the public submission, we were not sure if we will be heard. But it was important that you write a submission, you bring in testimony of people, you get people who could put things in perspective, because whenever there is policy makers, they need to read things and they need to also assess if what claims you are making, if it is of any value or not. Okay, so we created that value. We created those kind of testimonials, and that's how Australian Human Rights Commission was able to accept that. Okay, but then that acceptance just didn't stay there. Then there were public submissions at the council level. So Melbourne Council, there were public submissions in Monash Council. So these were the two councils that now have included caste discrimination within its council policies, that there should be no caste discrimination. Now that is very important. Then third thing was at state level, Queensland state level, the work policies, they've included caste discrimination aspect within the work policy. Now these are tangible changes. Okay, so someone in Australia about 5-7 years back, they would have said that, hey, caste discrimination does not exist, and why are you talking about it? Today, if someone says that, we can always challenge, hey, listen, it is there, it is proven, it is within the AHRC, it is accepted at council level, so be careful. If you are being prejudiced, you will be challenged. And we want it to be at a particular level that people can be taken to court on the basis of their discrimination. And discrimination, as I said, there are multiple forms of discrimination. There is direct, there is indirect, there is different kinds of aggression, microaggressions, that is happening. All those things needs to be taken into account. And how can we create a kind of an understanding is through creating awareness, through community consultations, through having symposiums and conferences, through making films, through documenting people's voices. Like I remember one of the things is what made me make this documentary, Resisting Caste in Australia, Casteism in Australia, was our first discussion with the Australian Human Rights Commission. And when they looked at our submission, then they said that, hey, you have done enough. And it will be good for us to get more testimonials where people can share about their stories, because one thing is that we keep hearing about things, but we don't get people who come out and tell their story. And remember, caste discrimination or casteism has a very generational trauma. Lots of people hide their caste, and they don't want to talk about their caste. They don't want to come out in open because they have to face the brunt. They have to lose friendship. They come into that kind of direct focus. Oh, that person is from that caste. They will talk like this. Oh, that person, that kind of looking down at people the moment they know about someone's caste. And that is another kind of prejudice that people have to face, and that's why they feel it's better to stay hidden rather than coming out. So for me, it was very difficult to find people who could actually come out and own who they are and show their face and talk about the discrimination that they have faced or the kind of issues. So each and every person who appear in my film are very strong, are very powerful, who have understood what discrimination is, and who have also taken the onus that yes, we will be out there showing ourselves and owning what we are saying, so that others get some kind of powerfulness, or to feel the power that speaking does not make you feel lower, but it empowers you, and it also helps others to come out in open. As I mentioned, I had a symposium where about 22 people participated in Melbourne, and we had students who have just started in Australia doing the masters and all, and they were able to share their experience of how they see discrimination taking place, not direct but indirect. People making casteist remarks, or people sharing casteist jokes, or people not wanting to participate. Like one of the students, she said that she invited someone to Ambedkar Jayanti, which is the celebration of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's birth anniversary on 14th of April, and she invited one of her friends, and she said, "No, I'm not going to be, participating there, because suddenly it will identify me as someone from that community." Now, what is that? You know, and then another person was actually asked, why are you even celebrating Ambedkar's Jayanti? Isn't it from the people of the low caste? Because she didn't understand that she mistook her from being from a privileged caste, so-called privileged caste, or I prefer oppressor caste. Majority of Ambedkarites do now. So oppressor caste, and for them it's difficult to celebrate Ambedkar. As I said, that's another kind of a problem. In fact, in my forthcoming article is on Ambedkar's reverence and hatred towards Ambedkar, how it is taking shape. The celebritization of Ambedkar, both some people who despise him and people who worship him. So that's a kind of a interesting discussion which actually happened after listening to those people, lots of testimonials, and then I thought that I should write about it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kishore, for taking your time out for this insightful conversation. And genuinely, this was really insightful and doing the work that so many people would rather avoid. Thank you for that. And, conversations like these are not comfortable, honestly. I mean, caste makes people uneasy, and it may not be that exactly why we need to keep having them because of the silence, which really protects the status quo. And because of the status quo, it is not working for everyone. And as you said in your documentary, Jai Bhim is not just a greeting, it's an affirmation, it's a holding on to dignity, it's carrying Dr. Baba Sahib's legacy forward, even in a new country. To everyone listening, if it made you think, if it made you uncomfortable, if it made you want to learn more good things, that's the point. I mean, watch Dr. Kishore's documentary when it comes out, read his work, and most importantly, have these conversations in your own circles. Thanks for turning into Courageous Conversation. Until next time, this is Heman. And once again, thank you very much, Dr. Kishore, for being on this platform.
Thanks, Heman. And as you said, it's very important to acknowledge Dr. Ambedkar's contribution and his particular spirit that lives on and gives so many of us the courage to fight on. And with that, Jai Bhim to all who's listening, and we look forward to your comments.
Yeah.